Today I want to share with you our experience our country has received last year. I work in the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, and we are responsible for ensuring access to high-speed internet for all Ukrainians. When we were created 3 years ago, the 4G technology coverage by at least 2 mobile operators had only 65% of Ukrainians. So we have set the ambitious goal to provide 95% of citizens with access to mobile high-speed internet. So we have taken certain steps to help mobile operators meet this goal and reached an intermediate level of high-speed internet coverage by 24th of February 2022. 89% of Ukrainians had access to 4G from at least 2 mobile operators. And what is more important for me, 2.7 million of Ukrainians in more than 8.3 thousand villages got access for the first time. However, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, national telecom sector faced unprecedented challenges after this. The first thing that occupiers do in the temporarily occupied territories is to take away mobile connectivity. The purpose is simple: to limit people's access to the internet and truthful information, which is vital in current situation. This is how they put people in stressful situation, so that no one can do what used to be essential: make a phone call. It's hard to imagine that this could happen in Europe in the 21st century. Russia's attempts to control the flow of information have been quite extensive. More than 4,000 base stations have been destroyed or seized by soldiers since the beginning of the invasion, and more than 60,000 kilometers of fiber optic network have been damaged or destroyed. By the end of May 2022, 80% of base stations in temporarily occupied Kherson and Zaporizhia region were active, but then the network was shut down from the inside by the invaders. Ukrainian operators don't have the opportunity to maintain their network there and go to check problems with base stations because they don't collaborate with the Russians and can't ensure the safety of their employees' lives. So at the worst time, 14% of all base stations in Ukraine, or 4.6 thousand, didn't work, being destroyed in the temporarily occupied territories. As for today, 8.7% of base stations don't work, mostly on these territories. So people there have been without mobile services and internet connection during last year. Can you imagine this all this time without being able to communicate with your family or browse the internet? And not of your own free will. For a year now, Russia has been trying to leave Ukraine completely offline and without connectivity. To do this, the occupiers destroy telecom infrastructure, stole equipment, and cut off electricity to cities for a long time. All of these are key elements for the internet and mobile connectivity. So to restore telecom industry, it is to its pre-war state, $1.5 billion is needed. It is the estimate provided by the World Bank as of February 2023. We are the first in history to face a problem of this scale. There have been cases in the world where certain regions temporarily had problems with electricity and connectivity during military conflicts or natural disasters. But what our neighbors doing to Ukraine now is a crime of incredible scale. Despite this, telecom survived and Ukrainians were online and connected during a year of full-scale war. People can communicate with relatives, find out the latest news, work and study online. But at the beginning, we had to act quickly and efficiently to respond to newly created obstacles. And that's why we took a number of measures to support the resilience of mobile connectivity during the war. First, after the full-scale invasion started, we understood that on the temporarily occupied territories, the situation with mobile services is deteriorating. So the decision to launch national mobile roaming was obvious. That allows Ukrainians to make calls even if their operators' nearest base stations are down. So a few weeks later, through the efforts of mobile operators, Ministry of Digital Transformation, Telecommunication Regulator, national mobile roaming was launched for the first time in Ukraine. All operators allow to use it within each other's network at no extra charge. For example, if the base station of a home operator was destroyed, people could connect to any other available station around them. It takes only a few clicks on the smartphone, while previously they should have to buy several SIM cards. So I can say that national roaming has really helped to stay connected longer for people on occupied territories until the whole mobile network was destroyed there. Roaming has been used through the country since last October due to the regular power outages. So in November, an average 1.5 million Ukrainians use national roaming per day. It provides voice calls and minimum internet speed to use messengers. This way, thousands of additional users don't overload the network. This is convenient, as even if the connection breaks down in the district of scheduled outages, Ukrainians can quickly switch to another operator's network. It doesn't guarantee that subscribers will have a connection, but it was a move to increase chances for this. Second, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, millions of people have been forced to flee their homes. According to our government, 4.8 million internally displaced people are officially registered in Ukraine. Most people moved to Kyiv, other big cities, or settled in the western part of our country. As a result, there was a sudden and significant network overload in these regions because of dozens of thousands more subscribers and more traffic. So the Ukrainian telecom regulator decided to allocate free frequencies in 2.1, 2.3, and 2.6 gigahertz for temporary use to mobile operators. They help to increase the capacity and quality of the network in all cities. The use of these bands had a positive effect on users, as there became available more spectrum for them, which means a better network throughput. After the full-scale invasion started, the level of payment for internet access services has fallen significantly due to decrease in population's ability to pay and internal migration. Fixed network operators tried to continue to provide services at their own expense when people could not pay, and also they restored destroyed networks without connection fee. One of the largest items of operational expenses was the rent for the use of power grid poles, which was backbreaking in the wartime conditions. Internet access has been and continues to be a critical need to enable communication and access to Ukrainian news. So therefore, our ministry appealed to the Ministry of Energy with a request to temporarily cancel the fee to use of power grid poles. This proposal was supported, and the changes came into force in April till November 2022, which saved operators tens of million hryvnias to be able to provide internet access services even to those users who don't pay internet fees and to save money for network equipment purchase. Also, a year ago, Russia had a plan to leave Ukraine completely offline and without connection. In the first days of the war, we faced the damaging of base stations. The networks were destroyed by artillery shells. This was the first and most difficult experience for all mobile operators on how to provide services to users. And technical teams could not get to site to equipment destruction. So occupiers locally destroyed networks in the entire territories and cut off local residents from communication with their loved ones and access to news. They do this to create an information vacuum, cause panic, and make it easier to put pressure on people. For example, during the occupation, invaders completely cut off Irpin, Bucha from communication. People could not call their relatives who were 10 kilometers from Kyiv and to understand whether they are alive and safe. So you can imagine how hard it was to accept it. Networks there had been destroyed in a week. A similar situation occurred in Kharkiv region, for example. The terrorist country has destroyed and damaged more than 4,000 base stations and a quarter of all internet network. Immediately after Ukrainian armed forces and state emergency services, repair teams of telecom companies were sent to the liberated territories. The repair crews faced many challenges. Nevertheless, mobile connectivity and internet gradually being restored by their efforts. Mobile operators have restored more than 1.7 base stations since last April and have restored connectivity in 500 settlements. Among them are Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Kherson regions. It's enormous amount that requires incredible resources and equipment. A lot of work was made with heroic efforts because in the frontline areas, technical teams often face with artillery shelling and their work is really dangerous. One such situation occurred when a car with 4 employees exploded in Sumy region after being hit by a mine, injuring 3 people and killing a driver. Technical teams of fixed and mobile operators are hidden heroes of the battle because they really risk their lives. In such circumstances, it takes a tremendous effort from dedicated professionals working tirelessly to keep the network up and running. During the reconstruction of the network, operators needed to build new masts as a building with base stations or initial masts were destroyed. But now the ground rent process usually takes up to 1 year. So in 2022, Ministry of Digital Transformation drafted and the Parliament passed the law that abolished some bureaucratic procedures and halved this time. Now operators have 6 months to complete all the documents and get all necessary approvals. But it is still a lot of time for liberated areas to wait until all mobile networks will be rebuilt properly. So we have already developed a new draft law aimed at shortening the time frame for decision making by local governments, as well as introduction of mechanism for establishing a land easement for the deployment of a network of digital infrastructure facilities. If the Parliament passes this bill, the land allocation period could be reduced from 6 months to about 3 months. And hope it will be the nearest months. Since the beginning of full-scale war, jointly with international partners, we have provided the country with backup satellite connectivity from SpaceX. Now we are one of the countries with the largest number of Starlink terminals. Only the government received more than 40,000 from international partners. Starlink also helped to restore much faster communication in the liberated territories. For example, Our ministry handed over a batch of Starlinks to operators, after which they are able to return the connection of a dozen base stations when optical network is destroyed. It is a temporary approach, but it helps to provide mobile services to people faster, while full repairment is being done. For example, 3 days after Kherson was liberated, the first Ukrainian mobile services were launched by 4 base stations with Starlinks. You can see in the picture. It also helped Ukrainian energy companies, social facilities, and emergency services to operate without interruption and stay connected to coordinate the recovery work of services, hospitals, educational institutions, and local authorities there. It takes weeks or months to restore telecom infrastructure. Starlink provides connectivity in the first day of the occupation. As soon as telecom companies adapted to the challenges associated with the destruction of networks and infrastructure, new ones were already waiting for them. Since October 10, the enemy has been directing efforts to leave Ukraine without electricity. That has changed all Ukraine's daily routine because power outages have started every day, several times a day. At the beginning, it was 2 hours per time, then it became 4 or 5 hours. The impact of power outages on mobile network is obvious. After stations are powered down, they continue to operate for a few more hours on the accumulator batteries, then they turn off. When the batteries are fully charged, they hold base station online for 3-5 hours. But this requires a day and a half of uninterruptible charging, which is impossible due to the constant shutdowns. Basically, we had 4 hours with electricity and 4 hours without. So there was not enough power to fully charge the batteries. So the base stations worked for up to an hour or even less. Therefore, this winter, if you don't have Wi-Fi on a passive optical network, it was problematic to stay online all day. In cities where power stations were damaged by missile strikes, people were day 2 with no power supply and also mobile services. Mobile networks were just not built to continue its performance without electricity for a long period. For instance, after the worst of Russian strikes on the power system in late November, only 41% of all base stations across the country were online during a day. 41% only. The reason was the destruction of several power stations in different regions. But we couldn't give up. At the beginning of 2022, mobile connectivity in Ukraine was provided by 34,000 base stations. More than 73% of them were equipped with rechargeable batteries by mobile operators. Nowadays, operators are actively purchasing and installing new lithium-ion batteries instead of all lead batteries. This will increase the operating time of the base stations during possible blackouts. National roaming has helped also during power outages. Users were able to connect to other networks to find powered up base station near them. And they only, if they succeeded, because could catch a signal from a station a few blocks away, so they could still call their relatives even during this period. On average, up to 1.5 million Ukrainians use national roaming every day during a period of regular power outages. Thanks to the work of energy and telecommunication front, we survived the winter and local power outages. Therefore, we are now much more confident in dealing with the consequences of massive attacks. As for what has been done to restore mobile services after them on electricity infrastructure, first, operators ordered hundreds of generators to power up base stations during power outages and united their efforts in this situation. Today, the generators are located at 7.5% of all base stations in the country. Operators made a joint scheme which is able to power up equipment on generators to provide wide city coverage with minimal availability of mobile services, even without centralized power supply. Also, they hired additional technical teams to turn on generators, to fill in the fuel, and to carry out technical services every 200 working hours. Also, the Ministry of Digital Transformation appealed to business representatives to allow operators to connect to electricity supply from their private industrial generators. And operators received feedback from private companies which have offered their generators to power up base stations. I have personally met with one agricultural company in Kyiv region, which connected to a base station to its 600 kilowatt generator. Hundreds of base stations now are powered in such a way. 300 of them are in Odessa, where energy infrastructure is often shelled and there are problems with electricity. We also carried on negotiations with the Ministry of Energy that proved to put mobile operators in the list of critical infrastructure and not to cut their energy supply during power outages, namely for the core network and data centers, because they require up to 2 tons of fuel per day per each. And also to continue the time of service provision, operators replaced the absorbent glass mat batteries with the new lithium-ion batteries, which can be charged faster and keep base station equipment working longer. And they also purchased a lot of generators. Also, the points of invisibility have been launched on the territory of Ukraine. You can see it in one of the pictures. The main purpose is to become an island of safety, warmth, and connectivity in the event of emergency power outages for more than 24 hours. These points of protection and humanitarian shelter work around the clock and are free of charge in the format of a temporary stay. The points of invisibility provide, among other things, mobile connectivity and internet with the help of Starlinks. In case of need during artillery fire or power outages, Kyiv's metro also has a reliable mobile network. It has a separate power supply, so it can power up its own needs during a few days. So mobile services will also be available there for all Kyiv's inhabitants. A big important moment. Since the beginning of full-scale invasion, many Ukrainians have been forced to leave Ukraine and move to the European Union, where mobile connectivity is more expensive than in Ukraine. But roaming for such Ukrainians is not free. Despite this, since April, as a sign of solidarity, European operators have signed a joint statement with Ukrainian mobile operators. It provides two-way tariff reductions for international calls and data transmission. Because of this, the wholesale tariffs for data transmission in roaming have been decreased by 30%. All this allows more than 4 million Ukrainians in European Union to call home and use mobile internet without additional overpayments. Speaking about plans for the future, I would mention some of them. Our top priority is to help mobile operators to restore their damaged infrastructure and network in the liberated territories. We have been doing changes in our legislation to provide less bureaucratic procedures and opportunities, to speed up the ground rent for the construction of base station towers, to transfer the state property for lease faster, and to simplify the long procedure of connection to the electricity supply. Also, the full-scale war demonstrated the need to increase the number of connection lines of internet traffic exchange points to at least 3 independent ones and review the bandwidth requirements of channels, node switches, and data centers of various classes. This is useful not only in time of war, but also in other crisis situations. My personal big goal is to launch 5G. In 2020, the government of Ukraine adopted the technology implementation plan aimed to ensure the right to use the radio frequencies resources granted under a competitive procedure. We have to conduct scientific work and to make sure that implementation of 5G will not interfere with operation of military radio electronic devices. For this, it's necessary to conduct some practical tests, which is impossible now during the war. Therefore, we are going to complete all necessary preparations to launch 5G technology shortly after our victory. Also, Ukraine is considering the possibility to test satellite to mobile technology. The aim is to provide universal coverage for smartphone users and eliminate dead zones where mobile connectivity is unavailable. Currently, the main Ukraine dead zone are liberated and remote locations beyond the reach of those terrestrial cell towers, such as large plains and mountainous areas. We are planning to launch a fund to support telecom restoration. The reason is to help fixed internet providers to rebuild their network infrastructure in rural areas. We understand that in cities, many people will come back home after the occupation and will be ready to pay for the internet services. But in villages, the situation is opposite. A lot of such people have lost their jobs and will not be able to cover internet providers' network building costs or even monthly fee. Also, our ministry wants to provide 4G coverage to the railways, which is nowadays quite low. Traveling by train, you are isolated from the surrounding world, and because mobile connectivity is practically absent. So we plan to build cell towers to lease them to mobile operators for further placement of radio equipment. So I know that Ukraine will win this war soon, but life will not be the same after all that happened to our people. But this made us stronger, and we will rebuild our country and handle all the problems. As for telecommunications, I know how efficiently the technical teams of our mobile operators work, so restoration will be very intensive. Thank you.